So, before we get going today, I wanted to tell you a couple of things. I was watching a video. This has nothing to do with the show today, which is why I'm putting this separately. I was watching a video the other day about coffee, science show, and it was all about how coffee is, what it does for us, what it does to us, all that kind of stuff. It was interesting. But they had a whole segment on this show about how we make coffee. And I don't mean coffee beans, but I mean actually make the coffee. And it was fascinating to me, and I gathered some tips there. So I've decided that I'm no longer using the Keurig. I've gone back to my percolator for a lot of reasons. And it's fascinating to me because the difference in the taste is amazing. And I guess it's something I hadn't really thought about between the Keurig, the drip machine, and the percolator. There is a distinct taste difference that is much smoother coming out of the percolator, and I like that. One of the things I really like, growing up, my mother used a percolator, and the whole house would always smell like coffee, and the good smell of coffee, you know what I mean? And with the percolator, I get that smell. So I'm hoping that this will help me to slow down a little bit, maybe not breathe quite as much, maybe focus more on what I'm saying a little bit, but we'll see. But I just wanted you to know that before the show today. It's not really important, doesn't really matter, but my coffee is really good. It came to me, it was a gift from Hank over at Food Fix Butcher and Bakery in Modesto, and it's really good. So if you're, I'm not shilling for him, but if you're in the area, you might want to stop by there and ask him for some of that coffee that Dave's drinking, because it's really good. All right, and now on with the real show. Many moons ago, I learned an important lesson. In January of 2010, as a direct fallout of the Tea Party movement, the election of Barack Obama, Constitution Thursday was born. But it was born kind of an interesting way. I mean, we talked a lot about how what the president was doing back then was unconstitutional. We'd say that. It's unconstitutional. We want the values of the framers. And the questions that I should have been asking then, I wasn't asking. It took time for me to learn. And the most important lesson I learned was, if you study anything closely, it is fraught with danger to your worldview. You will learn things that upset your worldview if you do the studying correctly. And it doesn't matter whether it's the Constitution, history, Torah, science, coffee, it doesn't matter. You will learn things that will upset your worldview because learning involves growth. It involves seeing things that, well, getting outside of your comfort zone. And it was kind of interesting because the guy that taught me that was actually, before I got the show, before I was hosting the show, I was actually producing Saturday shows for KFIV. And one of the shows that I was producing was a show called On the Docket with attorney Andrew Medlin. And it was a fascinating show. Andrew is a really good guy. And it was cool to me because he was one of the first people that, as a producer, he was involving me in the show. He didn't just want me pushing buttons. He needed that pushback from somebody in the studio, and it was fascinating and it was interesting, and he was using terms about the Constitution that I'd never heard before, and he began that process, and a lot of what became Constitution Thursday and some of the questions we asked and some of the things we did are a direct result of Andrew's influence there. was a great show. The primary lesson that I learned, though, is our society has degenerated into a society of instant gratification. We want things right now. Now, I didn't learn that from Andrew, but we want our way or else, whether we're going to burn stuff down or I'm going to hold my breath, stomp my feet, I'm going to pout about it, I'm going to move the parlor because I'm not getting what I want. What I won't do as a society, what we've become is, what we won't do is we won't think about things. We just don't. We would rather just say, I don't like that, and move on. And what I learned a long time ago, primarily from Andrew, but through a lot of study in the 11 years of Constitution Thursday, is, quote, I don't like that is not a valid constitutional argument. There are a lot of things I don't like, believe me. I could go through the list. I don't like raisins. I just don't. I never have. I don't like cooked carrots, especially if they're cooked wrong. I don't like the Las Vegas Raiders. I hate the Boston Red Sox and the San Francisco Giants, and I despise smoking, as you well know. But I'm not liking those things is not a valid reason for banning them. Now, let's be clear, if by some chance I ever become the emperor of the world, those things will be banned, but I don't think you have much to worry about there. I don't like something is not really a valid argument. It's not really a reason to do something or not do something when it comes to particularly a legal process, a constitutional process. We don't think, we don't ask ourselves questions, and we want it our way, or we're going to do something, whether that's burn down Portland or move to parlor or whatever. I don't like it, but there are some things that we do have to talk about that aren't involving coffee, unfortunately. The Trump campaign has filed several lawsuits, the primary one being in Pennsylvania, as you know. This is over the mail-in balloting conducted in Pennsylvania. Now look, I get it. I get what they are saying. I've read the lawsuit, and like a good conspiracy theory, it sounds great. I was watching Chariot of the Gods. You remember this? Back in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, a guy by the name of Eric von Daniken wrote the first real conspiracy book that I remember about ancient aliens coming to Earth and all of our stuff. And Sun Pictures turned it into a film in the 1970s. And I remember going to see it in the theater with my best friend at the time. We convinced our parents to let us go see it. Went and saw it in the theater. It was great in Denver, and I was fascinated by it. But as time has gone by, Chariots of the Gods has kind of fallen apart because it was conjecture based on speculation, not observation. This lawsuit, while, how do I say this politely? I get it. We don't like what happened in Pennsylvania. Is similar to Chariots of the Gods. Come on, let us reason together through this. Let us think about some things and avoid the I don't like it and start actually talking about the substantive arguments that we have here. The lawsuit in and of itself is verbose, I'll give you that. There's a lot of talk about constitutional rights and equal protection and those sorts of things, which on the surface of it sound great. I mean, this is really no different than the Tea Party. We want the values of the framers. Until you ask, well, which framers are you talking about? There are questions that the lawsuit itself does not answer. Now, I get it. This is supposed to go before a judge, where a judge presumably would ask those questions. And I would have to assume that the Trump campaign has answers to those questions. But I have a feeling that they really don't, based on the content of the article, or the lawsuit. The lawsuit is an attempt to disallow mail-in ballots in one state, Pennsylvania. I get it, they filed these lawsuits in other states, but we're just looking at Pennsylvania right now. most of the mail-in ballots, as you know, in Pennsylvania, allegedly, supposedly, based on the counting, were against Trump in Pennsylvania. And the Trump campaign has alleged inequality of the treatment of the ballots in the treatment of mail-in ballots versus in-person ballots. They have alleged, essentially, that mail-in ballots, in essence, the words they used were essentially erase the walk-in ballots because they're not subject to the same scrutiny of a person who walks up and ballot and votes in person. Essentially, what they're arguing is that mail-in balloting in Pennsylvania is unconstitutional because it doesn't meet the same scrutiny. Well, there's some problems with that, and there should be some problems with it. Your mind, again, you don't like the results in Pennsylvania. I get that. I understand that. But you should be asking questions, and you should be acknowledging the fact that I don't like that is not a constitutional argument. Certainly not a valid one. When we look at this argument, the problem should be fairly obvious, but for some reason, I'm not sure why, and the lawsuit filed does not address this. Again, I presume in front of a judge there would be more information, but we're not there yet. And in order to get this in front of a judge, these are the kinds of questions that should have been answered. These are the kinds of things that should have been discussed. Number one, we've been doing mail-in balloting for years. In fact, there are some states, Washington, where vote by mail is pretty much the only way you can do it. Yes, you can go to the county clerk's office on election day and fill out a mail-in ballot and hand it to them, but functionally, we only do mail-in balloting. In California, there are places where you only do mail-in balloting. Many states have adopted this because, number one, it's cheaper, it's easier, it's more inclusive, it's less likely to be disenfranchising, and frankly, from a technology standpoint, it should be easier. I mean, that's just my own opinion, but you can take it for what it's worth. But let's say that the Trump campaign's argument that in Pennsylvania, mail-in voting is unconstitutional, but let's say for the sake of argument that it is valid. Okay. If it's unconstitutional in Pennsylvania, what is it in the other states? Particularly the states that have mail-in balloting that voted for Trump. Is it equally as invalid in those states as it is in Pennsylvania? The lawsuit, as filed by the Trump campaign, doesn't address that question. But I guarantee it's the first question a judge is going to ask. It should be. If it's unconstitutional in Pennsylvania, how is it not unconstitutional in Utah or Wyoming or one of these other states that went for Trump with mail-in balloting? It either is or it isn't. And the problem is, of course, that this has been planned for months. I mean, it was back in April that Pennsylvania announced that they were going to do this before the primaries because of the Rona. There was no serious objection raised then. In fact, Republican officials in the state of Pennsylvania were very much in favor of this because they felt like it was safer. Well, okay, if it doesn't go the way you want, but it's safer, is it unconstitutional? And we're not talking about the treatment of people here. We're talking about the treatment of ballots, which ballots don't have rights, folks. Voters have rights, but ballots don't. I mean, where's the line, I guess? If this is unconstitutional, does it disenfranchise millions of voters across the country? Not to mention Pennsylvania, but across the country. What does it do to my ballot? My ballot was sent by mail because it has to be. Washington state law. If voting by mail is unconstitutional, my vote was for Trump. Do they throw it out? Does Trump get 1-2 less votes here because of that? 3 that I know of? Why wait till now to make this argument? Why not make this argument back in April when it was clear? But I guess the bigger problem for me in all of this is there are a lot of allegations here about how the mail-in ballots were handled. We weren't allowed to do this. This rule wasn't followed. This wasn't done. Whereas these are allegations, I get it. They're just like Eric von Daniken's speculation that the Easter Island heads were built by aliens. Pyramids were built by aliens. Why? Well, because it's what I think happened. It's the only logical explanation in my mind, because I don't like what the other alternatives would be. I live in the 21st century, folks. I live in an era when people say something innocuous, something off the record, and I turn on my news and it's boom, blasted in front of me. For God's sakes, the Kardashians announced, I know, I don't care, but the Kardashians announced yesterday that their family Christmas party was going to go on as usual. One, why do I care? But two, the reaction to that people have had to this announcement is as entertaining as anything else. But even nobody can do anything these days without everybody seeing it. There was a rapper shot in Dallas that you get to watch the video of him being shot. It's crazy. If these allegations are in fact true in the 21st century, is there video of it? Are there pictures of it? Recordings of it? For God's sakes, where was Project Veritas in all this? If Project Veritas wasn't involved with it, what's the likelihood of it actually happening? I get it. I get that we don't like the results, but I don't like it is still not a valid constitutional argument. You can fill out all the lawsuits you want, file them all you want, make all the allegations you want, but you're still going to have to prove it. You're still going to have to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, your accusations. Look, I have no doubt in my mind, none whatsoever, that election cheating has been going on since 1796. I don't think the first two elections, I don't think we had any cheating when George Washington was basically unanimously elected. I don't think there was any cheating there. But since that time, cheating in an election is, well, it's like corking baseball bats and spitballs. I mean, it's part of the game, but it doesn't really affect anything in the biggest scheme of things. In 1876, Bourbon Democrats were pulling guns on voters to try to get to tell them, to order them, to threaten them to change their votes from Republicans to Democrats. You want to know why the Democrat Party wants you to believe today that the Republicans and Democrats switched places at some point? That's why, because their party legacy is that of cheating. I mean, it really is. That's why they want you to believe that. Not true. But it also doesn't change the fact that the Republicans have sold out their own legacy. Those kinds of things are true. All that aside, cheating is unfortunate. It's a reality. It does happen. If that's the case, why is there no proof of it? Why file a lawsuit if you can't actually show me a video of somebody doing this? Multiple people doing this, widespread doing this. Instead of just trying to invalidate ballots on the basis of unconstitutionality without ever answering the question of, if it's invalid in Pennsylvania, why isn't it invalid in Washington or Idaho or Montana or Iowa? These are questions that it's just sort of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing if it sticks. It's just calculated to delay. That's all it is. I don't like it. You don't like it. I get it. But here's the question that you have to ask yourself. Do we really, 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 really want the presidency of the United States decided by the courts in favor of Trump? Is that really what you want? Now, I'm serious. Now, you may say to yourself, yes, that's what I want, because I hate Democrats, or I hate this, or I hate that, whatever. What happens if that happens? What's the end result of that? What do you think happens in 2022 if that happens? If you think the last 4 years were an orgy of Democrat excess when it comes to how they deal with President Trump, what do you think is going to happen if the judiciary gets involved in this and starts disenfranchising millions of voters, because that's how it'll be presented, in order to put Trump back in the White House. How do you think that's going to go? Because I'm telling you, it ain't going to go well. And while I'm certainly not in favor of President Biden, certainly not in favor of President Harris, I have to believe that overall it would be better for the GOP, it would be better for the Republicans, for Trump to stop stomping his feet, holding his breath, and demanding that everybody move to Parler because Facebook doesn't like him, and Pennsylvania has mail-in balloting, which they had back in the primaries, and he didn't complain about that at all. Ultimately, I don't like it is not a valid constitutional argument. And the sooner we accept that, the sooner we move on and start planning for the future, start planning for tomorrow, the better off we'll be. Otherwise, it's just going to keep going and going and going and going and going and going and never freaking stop. And how is that good for the country? Did we forget somewhere along the line that it's the country, not one guy? Kind of feel like somewhere along the line we did, which has really been the whole point, isn't it? I don't like it. It's still not a valid constitutional argument.